Okay, welcome to the Wyoming Department of Education's Equitable Participation discussion. This is Les Cook, the state's Title I-A Director and School Improvement Performance Manager. I'm hosting this in anticipation of the upcoming 21-22 Consolidated and Title I-A application. Go through some steps, give you some pointers. Today I'm going to go kind of fast because you obviously have the option to freeze or stop the video to complete other tasks of your day. I'm going to present a number of topics in a scrolling Word document, share screen, and then I'm going to go to the grant management system and show you a number of steps that I think will achieve the best result for you to calculate equitable share from those private and homeschool families and private schools that request services. So hopefully this is something that'll be helpful for you. Again, I don't think I will be able to anticipate all of your questions with my commentary in my document here, as this is a very complex topic, but I do think there's enough here to get you started. And then further, obviously, you're always willing or always able to give me a call or schedule a one-on-one Zoom conference or Google Meet or an email, and I can help you get through the process. We're going to start with this screen here. This is the format that we're going to go through. We're going to discuss answering the question, obviously, what is equitable participation? What are the correct steps? I've got 8 steps that I think are going to get you to where you need to be to complete and submit an application. And then I'm going to share a number of screens. First, we'll bring in the 2 forms that I sent out recently, the new forms, the verification of private homeschool participation form, and the LEA affirmation of consultation with private and home schools. Both of these have been submitted to you in previous emails. And then I'll pull in some screens from the grant management system, both in the consolidated and Title I-A subsections. And the different tabs would be the constituency participation, the private school participation, the required documents checklist, and then targeting steps 1 through 4, getting you to targeting step number 4, which may be indeed the most important step in all of this to calculate equitable share, and then largely coming from the Serve Schools tab previously. Once I'm done with that, I'll come back to this very document and I'll go through a brief recap of all the comments that we've went through before, and hopefully this gets you to where you want to be. Now, what is equitable participation? Overview. ESSA does not apply to private and home schools. So a number of things that you associate with a public school have no bearing in a private or a home school. First off, they do not have to comply with this law's standards and assessments requirements. Private and home schools cannot be identified as the 2 common acronyms in school improvement, CSI, which of course is comprehensive support and improvement, and TSI, which is targeted support and improvement. And then what I like to call models, targeted assistance school or a school-wide school, those classifications also bear no relevance to private and home schools, only public schools. Title I does require LEAs to provide support to private and homeschool students who reside within the attendance areas of Title I public schools. All 48 LEAs do receive Title I-A funds, so a requirement as a recipient of those funds, you must provide equitable services to eligible private and homeschool students who reside in the LEA on a basis equitable to the participation of teachers and families of public school children receiving these services, and very similar to the supplement not supplant with Title I-A funding. Very similar here, supplementary to the regular program. In other words, the Title I funds provide services that do not supplant the services that would, in the absence of Title I services, be available to participating private and homeschool children. So these are important distinctions. Services must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological, both to a homeschool and a private school environment. And then you as the LEA must maintain oversight of the Title I program. The premise here, of course, is that services are provided to children. That's the management unit. It's not the school. Therefore, private and homeschool children must be given an equitable opportunity to participate. Where would you actually complete this task? You can do it obviously in the private school itself, conduct the services in the local public school in that particular attendance area with consultation and agreement with both private and home schools. You can choose an alternate site that's neutral and providing those services in the least disruptive and least expensive location. If you do out on site at the private school, for example, make sure that these services are distinct from the regular program of that private school. Equipment materials purchased with Title I funds, reserved solely for the Title I student staff at the private school. Please do not interrupt those services. Types of services, a number of them here. Looking at this, these are all services that are Title I-A expenditures, allowable expenditures, and I've seen these in your applications visiting with you. These are very similar to what you're doing now in your public schools. The instructional services, though, that are provided by public school employees or third-party contractors, these would be your staff that are providing homeschool and private school instruction. Other options, expanded learning time before and after school. I know a lot of your schools are doing that now. One-on-one tutoring, summer school programs with COVID-19. A lot of your schools I had seen in your applications had conducted summer school to kind of catch things up in anticipation of the new school year, the 2020-2021. Family literacy programs, counseling, mentoring, computer assisted instruction, home tutoring, take home computers, dual or concurrent enrollment, educational TV, radio, computers, and other technology, including like hotspots, Wi-Fi hookup, mobile educational services, special education services. These are all things I know you're doing right now in your public schools, and any combination of the above. These are the types of services, again, that are allowable conducting private and homeschool instruction. Now, who is eligible and how do you determine the allocation? Eligible students first reside in participating public school attendance areas of the district. They're identified by the district as failing or most at risk of failing to meet educational related objective criteria. Now, you as the LEA must select the students who are low achieving. This is a big task. So poverty is not the criterion, it's performance. Making an assessment of those students that are most at risk of failing to meet educationally related objective criteria. The allocation itself is based on the number of low income private and homeschool students who reside in participating public school attendance areas. So here is where poverty is part of the equation. It generally represents the proportion of low income students in each participating public school attendance area who attend private and homeschool as compared to public school. So I see this as two steps. One is the evaluation, the first one. Poverty is not the criterion. You, as the LEA, determine the number of students requesting services that are eligible to receive services. So there's going to be a difference, I suspect. The number of students requesting services will differ from those that are eligible. In the calculation itself, another subset, determine the number of those eligible students, those most at risk of failing to meet the educational standards. How many of those are actually low income? So there's another subset of students. This is where poverty does determine, is the criterion. Evaluation is not. It's based on the performance or those most at risk of failing to meet educationally related objective criteria. Now the challenge, and I brought this up with our CARES funding, how do you obtain reliable poverty data on private and homeschool students? You have 5 options. The first 4 I've got right here, obviously. The preferred option, you'll see this in the non-regulatory guide, is to follow what you currently do, most of you in your public schools assessing low income, poverty, is the free and reduced lunch. So we're going to do it from data from the same source, using the same measure of low income used to count public children. Or you could do a survey with extrapolation. You can survey private and homeschool students and extrapolate for incomplete data. I've not seen an example of this from any of you yet, but I think I have a pretty good idea how we could conduct this. If you do decide or you are confronted with this, we could work on this together. Another one, maybe the most common other than number one, would be comparable data. Data from another source. You as the LEA have the determination, you have the authority to determine what is reliable poverty data or not. If it comes from another source and you find it valid, you're welcome to use that data. In a correlated measure, maybe use an equated measure of low income correlated with the measure of low income used to count public school children. Like number two, I've not seen this example from any of you yet, but I think I've got a pretty good idea how we could circumvent this and get an equated measure correlated with the measure of low income used to count public school children. So if you wish to go after this one and you want to visit with me and go through it, I'd be delighted to help you. The one that might be the most attractive to use because it does, it alleviates you having to assess this data from people that might be reluctant to share would be applying the percent poverty of each public school attendance area to the number of private and homeschool children who reside in that particular attendance area. This is the one most of you, I think all of you, in fact, use to determine your CARES allocation, the proportional measure. And I shared this in an earlier Google slide presentation. Here's a hypothetical example, very simple. Two schools, they're Title I-A served attendance areas. I'm going to call them West and East. Both have a public enrollment, obviously, 117 and 221. Their public low income numbers accordingly are 59 and 77. So this school just over 50%, this school just under 35%. The non-public column, non-public enrollment, these are the number of students you deem through your evaluation process that are eligible to receive services. So there are 10 in the West attendance area and 15. This is a combination of both private and homeschool. There are 25 total students. Now, just apply this percent here, going across with the 10. Obviously, half of that is 5. 35% or so of 15 is 5 again. Of the 25 eligible students, 10 of the 25 are deemed as low income students. So in this example, a way to express this might be of a non-public enrollment number equals the number of eligible private and homeschool students. These 25 students you determined are the most at risk of failing to meet the objective criteria, the educationally related objective criteria. So there are 25 non-public eligible students requesting services. The non-public number of low-income students is used to actually calculate equitable share. So this 10 is maybe the most important number here. So there are 10 of the 25 students that are low income. So equitable share is calculated from this number based on the number of students that are deemed eligible, which you determined in this example are 25 non-public, private, and homeschool students, and or homeschool students. The two forms that I sent out recently and edited, verification of private homeschool participation and the LEA affirmation of consultation with private homeschools, the verification form, this one assesses the number of private and homeschool students requesting services, and then it captures the number of private and homeschool students requesting services that are identified as low income. And again, this is the number used to calculate equitable share. Which method you'd use to determine low income status, this is your discretion of those 5. Although I do heavily encourage you to keep records, the data source and the calculation itself, we don't require that you upload this. If you would like me to see it in advance, go through it with you, I'd be delighted to help you. But again, this is your responsibility. Keep records of your data source, which of the 5 methods you chose, and then your calculation results. Keep these on file for the 21-22 application. Timely and meaningful consultation is very important. You are required to do this with private school officials and homeschool representatives that request services. And I try to think of one word, maybe an operative word, that defines the goal between yourself as the LEA and the two populations, the private and homeschool populations. And I think it's an agreement between yourself and these respective private homeschool officials or homeschool representatives on how to provide equitable and effective programs. The burden does fall on you. You must initiate the consultation annually to determine participation in equitable services. I know a lot of you rarely, if ever, receive responses from people. If you do, they decline the service. But again, you must initiate this consultation, the survey itself, annually to determine participation in equitable services. So you must consult with private school officials and homeschool representatives during the design and development of your Title I program, in this case, the 21-22 upcoming application school year. These are the topics you'll see on the form. They're listed here, and it's a good reference for you. How will you identify the student's academic needs? What services will you offer? How, where, when? This is the venue. Where you're going to do the service, what time of the day, approximate time, and by whom the services will be provided, how services and academic progress will be assessed, and how the results will be used to improve, assess Title I, the size and scope of equitable services, the method and source of data used to determine number of children. You have to have an agreement with the family, with the private school, parent involvement and professional development services for families and teachers, how and when the LEA will make decisions regarding the service delivery the LEA will use to provide equitable services, how if you disagree with the views of private homeschool regarding the provision of services by a third-party provider, the LEA will provide in writing an analysis of the reasons for not selecting that option, whether to combine Title I-A funds with other ESEA program funds for private homeschool students. So these are all things that you're going to negotiate, consult with at the table with private school officials and homeschool representatives. Now, before I go to other slides or other pictures here of the grant management system and the two forms, I'm going to give you an idea of how to go about the correct steps. This will probably make much more sense to you once you open up the grant management system, but I say you start by identifying lead contacts from your LEA to represent potential participation from homeschools and private schools. You're going to name these in the constituency participation tab. Collect completed verification, participation, and affirmation of consultation forms. And we're going to do this by uploading them in the required documents checklist tab, as you've been doing in the past. From here, you're going to assess the number of private and homeschool students receiving services. And this is the total number of private and homeschool students that are deemed low income. This is the number that's going to be used to calculate equitable share. Now we're going to switch back to the Title I-A basic section. You're going to associate these students with related Title I-A attendance areas and targeting step number 1 in the Title I-A basic section. Go ahead, do your rankings, choose which ranking method you're going to use. Ensure that these respective schools are served in the Serve Schools tab. Remember, that's the tab where you decide which schools are school-wide and which ones are targeted assistance. And it's right before the targeting step number 4 tab. So the total number of low income number in the Serve Schools tab is auto-filled in the shaded box, and it represents the number of low income students in participating Title I school attendance areas. This is in the non-public column in targeting step number 4. Total number here in Serve Schools is going to then auto-fill in targeting step number 4. I'll show you where this happens. This is not the greatest way to go about. It's not a very linear process. So now we're going to go back to the consolidated section. Enter in the number of homeschool students in the box in this tab, the private school participation tab. Answer this question. There's a box right after it. How many homeschool students request and receive services from your district? This may not represent the total number of students requesting services because there are going to be private school students that might be a part of the equation. So of course, determine the number of private school students requesting and receiving services by that accumulated account in the uploaded verification, participation, and affirmation of consultation forms. Since the private school participation does document the number of homeschool students, a number, it doesn't ask for the number of private school students. It just asks for the private school. How many private schools are you serving? So to capture any gaps between the number of homeschool and private school, I'm asking that you go to the additional comments tab, list the number of private school students in this tab, so therefore it would equal the total number in the Serve Schools tab and the non-public number in targeting step number 4. The private non-public school equitable share table will auto appear on the bottom of the page. This is in the private school participation tab. The amount calculated as funds available for non-public instruction and professional development in targeting step number 4 will autofill in the shaded boxes in the A and B rows under the Title 1A column. These two rows, A and B, under the Title 1A column need to be the same amount. Make sure to click calculate totals and save the page. So again, A and B under Title 1A equal the same amount from targeting step number 4. And I'll show you how this happens. And maybe the last step here is the budget pages tab. Non-public instruction, salaries, benefits, purchase service supplies and materials. Budget for that, it's activity 37. And then non-public parent and family engagement is auto-calculated in targeting step number 4. Make sure that you budget for non-public parent and family engagement like you do for public, but it's not defined in the budget pages tab as a budget activity. Here's a couple of recommendations. Maybe go 20 coordination of services or 82 support services to adequately budget for non-public parent and family engagement in the budget pages tab. So before we go to our recap, let's do a different share here, and we're going to do a new share, and we are going to go to screen number 3 and do this. And here we are at the verification of participation with non-private profit private school officials or homeschool representatives. Put in the name of the LEA, enter the school year, the private school, the homeschool information. If you have a private school, enter it here, obviously. If you have a homeschool, enter it here. Here is where I'm asking for the number of students from the private school requesting services. If it's the entire enrollment, fill it in. If it's just a subset of students, fill that number in. Maybe a better way for me to have labeled this instead of saying private school enrollment would be number of students requesting services from the private school or private schools. Now here is where you'll enter in the number of homeschool students requesting services. And here is the number of students identified as low income. You would do that, take this from that calculation that you have to upload, enter in these numbers. Here's where you're going to enter in which of the 5 low income equations did you choose to determine low income status. Again, data from the same source is the most common, the preferred option. And I've got something down here. Entry for number of students identified as low income is the number used to calculate equitable share. You are required to keep data sources and calculations used to determine low income enrollment on file. Again, you do not necessarily need to upload it in the required documents checklist tab. You're certainly welcome to. If you'd like me to review it with you in advance of submitting, I'm certainly open to that engagement as well. Go ahead and fill in here the private school or homeschool representative. Have them make sure that they enter in this information, yes or no, as to their desire to participate, their desire to be involved in the planning, etc. Enter in, here's my program, check if it's Title 1A, number of students. This is the number of students that are deemed low income. Where is the venue? Where are you going to deliver the services? Maybe it's the name of the school, or it's a neutral site, least expensive, least disruptive to the activities at that particular site. Get some signatures. And then, of course, sign yourself and date. And here's our information from the WDE, myself and Shannon as the ombudsman. And let me make sure I got the right screen. I think we're doing fine here. So we're going to go to the affirmation here. Here's the name of the LEA. Enter the school year. This is the document making sure that you provide this very important, timely, and meaningful consultation. I'm asking you to do this with both populations, both the homeschool and the private school. Again, if it's a private school, enter in this information. If it's a homeschool, make sure you enter in this information. Here are all of the topics that you need to discuss with both the private school official and the homeschool representative. These are the same bullets that I pulled up in my scrolling document. This will guide you through what topics. Read these as you go through with that person on the other end of the table. Make sure you discuss all these items. Here's where you're going to determine the grade level, the criteria, how you're going to meet the educationally related objective criteria. What is the method you use to determine the greatest need? Hopefully we'll get a signature from that private homeschool official representative and a date, and go ahead and sign yourself. And then here are the contacts, myself and Shannon again. So again, these forms I'm going to be using to determine the number of both homeschool and private school requesting services that are low income. If they do not match, the total cumulative count from these two forms do not match the entry in targeting step number 1, then I'm going to need to visit with you to make sure they match up. So the number of non-public students receiving services in targeting step number 4 equal the number of entries in these two forms. So let's go here, and we're going to pull up a test environment, and I'm going to use carbon number 1. And we'll go through a couple of steps here that gets you to where we need to be. So we're going to go to carbon number 1's 22 application. Again, this is a test environment, so it's not compromising any of their saved data. Let's start here, program detail. Here's the constituency participation tab. And again, this is in the consolidated section right up here in the upper right. I'm asking for you to list contacts for charter schools, private schools particularly, and homeschools. If these people attend this meeting, list those people representing the homeschool and the private school. If they don't attend, I still need you to list in both the private and homeschool a representative for potential participation for private schools and homeschools. Somebody from your LEA needs to be assigned this duty. And since I made a change there, I'm going to save this page. Now we're going to go to the required documents checklist tab. These are the two fields I talked about in the scrolling document. We need to have your verification of homeschool participation. Here's the form right here uploaded for your use. Here's where you're going to upload any any completed forms returned requesting services, as well as your mailing evidence. Hopefully you're doing this via certified mail receipts. Very helpful, showing evidence that you did contact your homeschools and your private schools in advance of the 21-22 application. And here's where you'll do your affirmation of consultation uploads that are returned, that you actually conducted with the private and home schools. Upload these forms. If you go through the process and let's say the homeschool and the private school back out, they decline, go ahead and upload it anyway as evidence that you actually went through the process. It certainly helps you. If they do return it, you go through the process, you sign it, the other party signs it, and they request services, you come to an agreement. Obviously, this is where you're going to upload these documents as well. So now let's go to the Title 1A section. And we're going to start here, program detail and targeting step number 1. Here's my example. Remember, we had 25 students that were deemed, that we determined were eligible students in the evaluation phase. And let's say, hypothetically, 23 of the homeschool and private school attend the Rollins Elementary attendance area, and 2 attend the Rollins Middle School, 25 total. We did the non-public low income count. We had 9 from Rollins Elementary, and we had 1 from the Rollins Middle School. So we have 10 total students that are non-public low income. Go to targeting step number 2, it pulls in your percents. Targeting step number 3, use your ranking method. And then your Serve Schools tab, it's pulling in, again, from targeting step number 1, the non-public low income numbers from Rollins Middle and Rollins Elementary equaling 10, which then pulls in 10 right here. This is the comment I shared earlier. The number here from the Serve Schools tab, 10 total, right here, I'm sorry, right there, 10, is then pulled into targeting step number 4 as the total number of low-income students in Title I school attendance areas, non-public. Creates the equitable share for you. So go through this entire page, save your set-asides, calculate your distribution amount, distribute the amount evenly, make sure you have check your distribution, make sure that this number is 0, attendance center allocation is 0, save your distribution, and notice that equitable share, all of these are saved tabs, auto-filled from the calculation itself, so it does it for you. Here's the number here, the funding here for funds available for non-public instruction and professional development, $17,721.98. I invite you to write that down on a scratch sheet of paper. Notice up here that there's $179.17 calculated for parent and family engagement. Since carbon number 1's total allocation exceeds $500,000 up here, they too have an allocation that they must establish as a set-aside for public parent and family engagement. You now will need to ensure that the parent and family engagement is conducted for both your homeschool and private school participating populations, and it's calculated here for you. So I'm going to write that down as well, 179.17 as parent and family engagement, non-public. Here's a total amount, so it adds up. This box here plus this box here adds up total to proportional amount, 17,901.15. So it adds up rather than adding down. So remember these numbers because we're going to go now back to the consolidated application page. We're going to go to program detail, and this is the page that is private school participation. So notice here that I've got everything marked no, but we have homeschool students in your district. Yes, so let's say in Carbon County there in Rollins, we have a total of 61 homeschool students. And through the mailings you receive and you determine that 8 of the 10, if you remember there are 10 total students, 8 are homeschooled, okay? But look what happens here when you do this and you enter a number here. Yes, number, this private non-school equitable share table auto appears. But we also have a private non-public school within your boundaries, yes, and we have 1, all right? And let's say it's called Surprise Academy. We're listing the private school that resides within your boundaries, whether or not they request services. In this case, they did. How many of the private non-public school listed request and receive services? 1. So homeschool lists the number of students, 8. Private school lists the school itself. It doesn't list the number of students, but there are 10 total students. So I'm assuming from this example that 8 students, obviously, are homeschooled. The additional 2 attend Surprise Academy. Therefore, 10 total non-public students, low income, used to calculate equitable share in targeting step number 4. Notice what happens here. Here are the 2 columns that I asked, the 2 rows that I asked that they equal each other. 17,721.98, that's the amount set aside for non-public instruction and family and professional development in the non-public sector. We're going to list here the name of your private school. Let's go Surprise Academy. And since we also have homeschool, maybe you want to do something like this. Surprise Academy and Homeschool. What are the services provided? Make this easy. We'll go Title 1A, Reading and Math. Let's do that. How will you evaluate the services provided? Testing results. Let's make it easy. We'll get through this. Now, these two numbers equal each other. This is the amount for non-public instruction and professional development. We're going to save the page. There it is. These two equal each other. Very good. One more thing I want to do is go back to the Budget Pages tab and make sure that you budgeted. Here's $17,721.98 for non-public instruction. Now, how much was set aside or calculated for parent and family engagement? It was the $179.17. Since the allocation here is greater than $500,000, both non-public and public need to set aside 1%. So here's your 1%, and I classified it as 82-support services. Now, if you don't want to do that and you just want to put it all in one entry under 37 instruction non-public, you're welcome to do that. So this then would be the number that was added up, total amount of funds that was in targeting step number 4. So just a different way to go about it. You're welcome to do either option. So let's go back to our Word document and we'll finish up. We're back here at the recap. Make sure we're in the right screen here. Equitable Share Word. All right, thank you. So remember, the key premise is that you're serving children, not schools. Services are provided to children, not the school. Therefore, private and homeschool children must be given an equitable participation opportunity to participate. Equitable participation is an annual requirement. We heavily encourage you, I heavily encourage you to do mailings via certified mail. And something I've said to a number of you, just my assessment here, my judgment, I do not think you necessarily need to mail out the verification, participation, and affirmation of consultation forms. Why? Because these are documents that are going to require signatures, they require consultation, which you can't do with just a mailing. You need to actively engage these parents, these officials, either in a remote sense or preferably in a physical environment to obtain signatures, get consent, confirm that you've actually went through the consultation process and completed both forms in the presence of the homeschool family, parent, guardian, and or the private school official. And I'm also asking, which might be a little different than your practice in previous years, is to complete both forms, both the verification, participation, and the affirmation of consultation forms for each private school and homeschool requesting services, and upload those accordingly in the required documents checklist tab. Remember, Title I services, benefits, materials, equipment must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological. Private school officials and homeschool representatives have no authority to obligate or receive Title I funds. You, as the LEA, maintain control of Title I funds and do not pay them out to a private or homeschool. Each LEA must designate a private and homeschool representative to represent these groups for potential participation. And you're doing this in the the constituency participation tab. Let's do this. Contact. Designate a contact to represent these groups. And then the set aside. A number of you, I think, have used equitable participation to establish a set aside for potential. Equitable participation is not a set aside. So unless you have documentation actively, accurately requesting services, I encourage you not to budget a set aside unless you have something received from a family and or homeschool and or private school requesting services. Remember that students that are eligible, that poverty is not the criterion. You as the LEA determine the students based on educationally related objective criterion. determined by you. The allocation itself is determined by poverty. Equitable share is based on the number of low-income private and homeschool students who reside in participating public school attendance areas. So I think there's two sets of data here. First off, I'm going to call it X. It's the number of private and homeschool students requesting services. Now, the number of private and homeschool students requesting services that are low income is equal to Y. And there's a couple of entries. One is the auto entry in targeting step number 4, number of low-income students in participating Title I school attendance areas in the non-public column. So Y, of course, is derived from the cumulative count in the non-public low-income column in the Serve Schools tab. On how did this get to the Serve Schools tab? Your entry in targeting step number 1. And then the manual entry in the Private School Participation tab, asking how many homeschool students request and receive services from your district. And if there's a difference there from the total number, I'm asking that you put a comment in the additional comments tab listing the number of private school students requesting services. Homeschool is manual. Private school, I'm asking you put a comment in this tab listing the number of private school students. So I'll end here with giving you the option, of course, at any time to request an individual Zoom or Google Hangout, and I would be delighted to schedule these options at your convenience, or a phone call at any time, or an email if there's something here that I said that doesn't make sense, or if you need further clarification. At any time, I can pull up a screen, I can schedule a Zoom or a Google Hangout, or just a phone call. I'd love to hear from you. Here are my contact information. Anything else I can do to help you through this process, it would be, again, my pleasure to assist you. And that is all I have for today. And thank you very much for your participation. Goodbye.